grease weights marking root-growing regions. These provinces grow the most, she said, tapping the northern hills and two cold river districts. Poor families plant them because the crop tolerates bad soil and stores well underground. Nobody tracks them carefully because nobody important eats them proudly. Alec leaned over the map, already seeing refineries, roads, drying sheds, merchant contracts. Then that changes first. Not publicly, Mira said. The second nobles hear root prices are rising, they'll investigate. She's right, Lysandra said from the doorway. Neither of them had heard her arrive. She stepped inside wearing a dark riding dress instead of court silk, a plain silver clasp at her throat, no crown, and the composed expression of a woman who had dismissed 3 ministers before breakfast and was willing to do 3 more by lunch. Alec noticed, not for the first time, that her presence changed the room without effort. Even the assistant straightened better when she crossed the threshold. What changes first, the Queen continued, approaching the map, is ownership of the knowledge, then control of the roots, then the story people are allowed to tell about it. Alec liked that answer far too much. Lysandra studied the marked districts. How fast can you improve purity? Fast enough to matter, not fast enough to get lazy. That was not the question. He glanced at her, caught the faint warning in her tone, and answered properly. A few weeks for noticeably cleaner crystals, longer for efficient yield. Months to standardize if I have enough roots and hands, and if I give you both, then Delosia stops treating sweetness like a gift and starts producing it like power. Mira, who had been trying very hard not to react like a witness to treason, muttered, I truly hate how good that sounds. The Queen's plan formed in layers. That was one of the first things Alec learned to admire about her. She did not solve only the immediate problem. She solved the next 3 that would grow out of it. She ordered discreet purchases of white root beets through unrelated estate buyers so no one would see a single obvious pattern. She directed the Royal Archive to compile soil records for northern tenant lands under an agricultural resilience review. She told Mira to identify which transport captains could keep their mouths shut for money and which could keep them shut for fear. She also ordered Alec to prepare 3 things within the week. 1 dessert no noble in Delosia had ever seen, 1 durable sweet ration suitable for travel, and 1 common market item cheap enough to ignite rumor. Why all 3, he asked. Because luxury makes people covet, Lysandra said. Durability makes officials care. Cheap indulgence makes cities impossible to control. I want to know which direction breaks first. That answer should not have been attractive. Alec found that it was. He spent the next days in a fever of production. The luxury item became a refined layered cream cake with smoother frosting and thin curls of hardened sugar ribbon, still slightly golden but astonishingly delicate by local standards. The durable ration became a dense, sweet beet honey candy, compact and shelf-stable, easier for travel than fruit paste and less sticky than existing festival sweets. The common market item took longer to solve because it had to be cheap, memorable, and addictive without requiring royal kitchens. After 2 failures and 1 tray of inedible bricks, Alec settled on small glazed sweet buns dusted with the rough early sweet powder and brushed with berry shine, soft, fragrant, hand-sized, and devastatingly easy to want again. Mira bit into 1 and stared at him in silence. That bad? Alec asked. She chewed, swallowed, and said, I am revising my opinion of social stability. The first official demonstration happened in private. Lysandra came at dusk with only 1 guard outside and no ministers. Alec laid out the 3 products on a linen-covered table beneath the high windows. The elegant cake, the packed travel candy, and a basket of warm sweet buns. The evening light turned the sugar glaze soft gold. For a moment the whole room looked less like a kitchen and more like a promise. The Queen tasted the bun first. Interesting choice. Smart choice. Rulers survive by testing the broadest use weapon before the prettiest one. She took 1 bite, then another. Not greedy. measured. But the second bite came too quickly to be political. This, she said, looking at the bun in her fingers, could start fights in a market. Alec nodded. That's the affordable version. She tasted the travel candy next and asked how long it would hold. He told her. Then the cake. When she reached the frosting this time, she did not faint. She closed her eyes for only a second, then opened them with the look of someone placing a new piece on the board and enjoying the sound it made. You were right, she said. About? This is not one trick. Mira, standing off to the side with a ledger and the exhausted expression of someone forced to witness destiny before dinner, murmured, I told him if this scaled, the capital would become unbearable. Lysandra almost smiled. Good. Let it. The emotional thread between Queen and Baker deepened there, though neither named it. It was still built on usefulness, on intelligence, on danger recognized and answered. But there were small things now. The way Lysandra asked his opinion without dressing the request as command, the way Alex stopped using his reckless court voice around her when the room was quiet, the way she lingered 1 minute longer than required after each tasting, the way he noticed when she looked tired before anyone else did. He learned pieces of her in fragments. She hated honeyed pear compote because Regency ministers had served it at every ceremonial meal the year they tried to make her seem decorative. She trusted maps more than speeches. She read budget ledgers herself because numbers lied less elegantly than nobles. She had never been allowed to want simple things in public. Alec learned all of that without her confessing it directly. He was a baker. Desire was half his trade. And she learned things about him too. That he talked more when he was nervous. That he became coldly precise when a batch was failing. That he used humor like armor whenever someone came too close to seeing how much being powerless still frightened him. That he never wasted bread, no matter how rich the room. The project's second bottleneck arrived 4 days later in the shape of politics. Honey merchants did not yet know exactly what Alec had made, but they knew enough to be afraid. A delegation requested audience with the Queen under the language of traditional food protection. Orchard syndicates followed with a polite memorandum about preserving the dignity of fruit-based confectionery heritage, which was the kind of sentence people write when they want to protect profit without sounding desperate. Guild confectioners demanded standards review of unlicensed kitchen methods. None of them attacked directly, they circled, probed, asked who the new baker was, asked why palace root orders had quietly risen, asked whether the Queen intended to privilege one household innovation over long-established artisanal sectors. Mira dropped the latest stack of petitions on Alec's table and said, Congratulations! Existing money has smelled future money. Alec skimmed one parchment and snorted. Fruit-based confectionery heritage? They're trying to make stagnation sound sacred. Lysandra handled the first wave without exposing the truth. She rejected the guild standards request. She invited honey merchants to present improved preservation methods at a later date, which was ruler language for not now, and probably never. She also approved a modest public event in 5 days' time, a spring charity distribution in the lower capital, where the palace would hand out small food gifts under her name. Alec looked up from the list. You're using the buns. I'm testing city response. You're going to weaponize charity with pastry. I'm going to learn how quickly delight becomes demand. He grinned. That too. The event became their first public structural breakthrough. But before it happened, Alec needed better output. So he pushed the workroom harder. He adjusted extraction ratios, let sliced roots sit longer before boiling, tested filtering through layered linen and fine ash clarification, recommended by one of the older scullions who had once worked syrup kettles in cider country. The results improved immediately. Less muddiness, better yield, finer crystals. The first near-powdered sweetness appeared on the 6th night in a shallow drying tray near the warm brick oven. Alex stared down at it under lamplight and felt a very specific thrill. Not surprise, but confirmation. The path was real. He called Mira over first. She touched the pale, almost powdery crystals, rubbed them between thumb and finger, then looked at him with open suspicion. "You're enjoying this too much? I was dead last week. Let me have this." She tasted some, closed her eyes briefly, then grabbed the ledger and started recalculating yield, like a woman defending herself emotionally with arithmetic. When Lysandra arrived later that night, he showed her the improved powder in silence. She came close enough that her sleeve brushed the edge of his arm. A tiny contact. Meaningless in court. Ridiculously loud in a half-lit workroom where both of them had stopped pretending they were interested only in process. "It changed again," she said. "It's cleaner. It looks like snow." Alex smiled faintly. "Edible snow." She took a pinch and let it fall from her fingers back into the tray, watching how softly it landed. "If you can do this reliably," she said, "I can change what entire provinces are worth." There it was again. The thing between them. Not softness, alignment. The kind that can become affection later if it survives ambition first. He looked at her profile in the lantern light, at the calm intelligence in her face, at the fatigue she hid better than everyone except him seemed able to notice. "You think in kingdoms," he said. "I have to. And if you didn't?" For the first time, she answered him not as queen to asset, but as woman to man. "I think," Lysandra said quietly, "I would still want to know how you made the impossible taste gentle." That line stayed with him longer than it should have. The public event arrived under a bright spring sky. The lower capital square filled early. Laborers, mothers with children, apprentices, soldiers off duty, fruit sellers, seamstresses, old men who attended anything rumored to involve food, and half the city's idle curiosity. The palace presented it as seasonal charity, baskets of bread, soup kettles, dried fruit packets, and at Alec's recommendation, trays upon trays of the small sweet buns, warm and glazed, dusted lightly with the new powder. He was not allowed center stage, at least not publicly. That was fine. He watched from behind the serving line in a plain kitchen coat, while palace attendants distributed the first batch under Lysandra's banner. The reaction began small. A little girl took one bite, froze, then clutched the bun in both hands like someone trying to prevent theft by reality. A cobbler's apprentice turned to his friend halfway through chewing and said, with absolute betrayal, "What have they been hiding from us?" An old woman who had spent 60 years eating fruit pies and honey cakes sat down on the fountain edge because she needed a moment of private reflection. Soldiers started angling back through the queue with their cloaks reversed, which would have worked better if they were not all terrible at lying. Within 10 minutes, the square was no longer attending a charity event. It was hunting seconds. Mira, standing beside Alec with 2 guards, and the soul of an auditor in a battlefield, muttered, "There goes order." Alec watched the line triple and said, "No, there comes demand." And Queen Lysandra, standing on the small platform above the square in dark silver with the spring wind catching her mantle, saw it happen in real time. Not applause, not ceremonial gratitude. Dependency beginning. The city had tasted something new, cheap enough to imagine wanting again and again, and it had happened under her name. That was the first major public or structural breakthrough of the series. By evening, bakers all across the lower capital were trying and failing to recreate the bun from memory and rumor. Honey sellers were claiming the palace must have used imported divine syrup. Children were asking whether the queen would release more snow buns tomorrow. And 3 different merchant houses had already sent inquiries to palace staff, asking if root supplies were suddenly of strategic interest. The theory had become leverage. That night, back in the workroom, Mira dropped a fresh bundle of city reports on the table. Shops in East Market sold out of cream by dusk. Fruit glaze prices jumped. 2 bakery owners got into a shouting match over whether whipped fat can hold shape that smooth. Also, someone in the square said Her Majesty must have a moon spirit in the kitchens. Alec grinned. "Good. Let them aim mystical while we build practical." Lysandra entered moments later, dismissing the outer guard with a glance. She was still dressed from the event, but the formal posture had loosened from her shoulders. Not much. Enough. You won, she said. Alex shook his head. We proved appetite. Winning comes later. She stopped across the table from him. No. Today I watched the capital accept a new desire without hesitation. Tomorrow the merchants react. Next week the nobles ask for private access. After that the provinces move. You were right from the beginning. He searched her face. About making the kingdom addicted? Yes. The silence after that felt warmer than the ovens. Then Mira, who had no patience for tension she was not being paid extra to endure, cleared her throat and slid the newest report across the table. Before either of you start staring at each other like a ballad is about to happen, you should know something more urgent. Lysandra took the parchment first. Her expression cooled as she read. Alec leaned in. What? Mira tapped the final line. Someone had begun buying white root beet harvest in bulk through shell agents in the northern districts. Not the crown. Someone else. And that meant the court had finally realized Alec Voren was far more dangerous and far more valuable than a baker had any right to be. Someone else was buying the roots. That single line drained the room of warmth. Queen Lysandra read the report again, slower this time, while Alec felt every success of the past week suddenly sharpen into danger. Until now, their advantage had been simple. He knew what the roots could become. The Queen understood what that meant at scale. Mira knew how to move supplies quietly. That had been enough while the city was still gossiping about miraculous buns and moon-white cake. But the moment another hand started buying white root beet harvests in bulk, the game changed. Secrecy had not broken completely yet, but it had started to crack. Who? Alec asked. Mira shook her head. Not one obvious house. The purchases are broken into small contracts through grain brokers, winter storage buyers, and livestock feed channels. Someone is hiding inside ordinary trade. Lysandra placed the report flat on the table. Then someone has already realized your invention begins in the soil. Alec leaned both hands on the work table. Not the invention. The bottleneck. That was the truth that made it dangerous. People did not need to understand sweet powder yet. They only needed to understand that Alec's work depended on a crop no one had cared about yesterday, and that someone should own it before the crown did. Menric might not know the chemistry. A merchant house might not know the method. A guild might not know the purity thresholds. It didn't matter. They could still strangle the future by buying the roots first. Lysandra saw the same path instantly. If we chase supply too openly, we reveal value. If we wait, we lose ground. She looked at Mira. How much have we already secured? Enough for palace work? Not enough for expansion? Not enough for a city? Certainly not enough for provincial rollout. Alex stared at the tray of pale crystals near the lamp. An hour ago, it had looked like the beginning of empire. Now it looked like bait left in the open too long. Then Lysandra made the decision that launched into a different scale. Good, she said quietly. Then we stop pretending this is only a kitchen matter. Alec looked up at her. You're taking it public. I'm taking part of it public. Her voice stayed calm, but that calm had the edge of steel hidden under silk. If the court has started sniffing around the crop, then I would rather define the narrative before someone else does. They will not hear that a nameless baker found a treasure root and embarrassed their monopoly. They will hear that the crown is sponsoring an agricultural and culinary innovation for the good of the realm. Mira actually smiled at that, thin and vicious. That is a prettier way of saying, sit down before I nationalize your appetite. Lysandra ignored the phrasing, but not the meaning. Tomorrow I announce a royal demonstration feast. Alec blinked. Tomorrow? Yes, that's not a feast. That's an ambush with tableware. It's a throne room, she said. The distinction is usually decorative. That was how the next stage began. Not in hiding, not in whispers. In a direct confrontation dressed as elegance. By dawn, the palace was already moving. Invitations went out under the Queen's seal to senior ministers, major guild heads, influential merchant families, a select handful of nobles, and the city's most decorated military quartermaster. which told Alec exactly how broad Lysandra intended the conversation to become. Not just taste, not just luxury, court, commerce, supply, logistics, status. She was dragging all of them into one room and forcing them to react on her terms. Alex spent the morning building the menu that would do it. He could not simply repeat the cake. The cake had opened the door, but repeating a miracle too early made it smaller. He needed a progression people could see and feel in their bones. He needed the menu to tell a story without ever explaining all of it. So he designed 3 stages. First, delight, then shock, then strategic fear. The delight course was delicate. Tiny cream-filled pastries glazed with berry shine and dusted with a finer version of sweet powder than any court guest had yet seen. They were light enough to vanish in 2 bites and rich enough to make those 2 bites feel memorable. The shock course was visual. Spun sugar ribbons arched over plated fruit like edible glass, catching candlelight in ways that made the desserts look enchanted. The strategic fear course was not a dessert at all, at least not in the courtly sense. Alec made compact sweet ration squares using beet sugar, ground nuts, oat paste, and dried fruit. Stable enough for travel and far more energizing than the sticky honey bricks usually forced on soldiers and messengers. He wanted the nobles admiring beauty while the quartermaster quietly recalculated campaigns. Mira watched him work and said, "You're trying to start 6 different arguments at once." Alec did not look up from the pan of cooling syrup. "No, I'm trying to make sure they can't reduce this to 1. That was the right instinct. The queen needed the court divided in its reaction, but united in its understanding that something irreversible had begun. If this stayed dessert, the old houses could sneer. If it touched luxury, city trade, food storage, and military supply all at once, then sneering became expensive. Lysandra visited before noon, not in court dress yet, just a dark fitted gown, with her hair partly pinned and a stack of annotated petitions in one hand. Alec noticed the fatigue in her eyes before she even spoke. She had probably been fighting half the palace since sunrise. "How bad?" he asked. She set the papers down on the edge of the table. "Bad enough to be useful." Mira reached for the top sheet. Honey guilds and fruit syndicates, and 3 rural estate councils suddenly concerned about seasonal stability. Also 1 temple advisor suggesting that excess pleasure clouds moral judgment. Alex snorted. "Then they're already losing." Lysandra's mouth shifted at the corner, not quite a smile, but close enough that he felt it anyway. "Do not become arrogant." "I'm not arrogant. I'm observant." "You're both," Mira said. The queen stepped closer to the plated practice pastries. "How ready are you?" "Ready enough to cause problems." "That," Lysandra said, "was also my assessment." There was something warmer under the exchange now, something they were both too sensible to name and too aware to ignore. It did not make them softer. It made the room more dangerous in a quieter way. Alec noticed how often her attention found him, even when Mira was speaking. Lysandra noticed he had stopped using jokes to dodge every serious question she asked. Neither spoke of it, not with the court about to sit between them like a blade. By evening, the throne hall had become a pressure chamber. The long tables were arranged below the dais instead of across the full hall, forcing everyone to remain visually under the queen's eye. Ministers in velvet and chain of office sat beside merchant elders, trying to look unthreatened. Guild representatives wore their dignity too stiffly. Nobles arrived with the polished expressions of people determined not to be impressed by anything they had not inherited. At the far side, exactly where Lysandra wanted him, sat General Voren Hal, the quartermaster lord of Delosia's western armies. Dry-faced, broad-shouldered, old enough to distrust novelty on principle, and smart enough to smell supply advantage from across a room. Alec watched from the service arch in a dark, formal kitchen coat, tailored just enough to stop him looking like a servant, and not enough to let anyone forget he began as one. That mattered. Lysandra had chosen the visual deliberately. She was not hiding him. She was placing him. When she entered, the room rose in a single tide. Queen Lysandra did not wear softness tonight. She wore authority sharpened into elegance. Silver-threaded black, sapphire at the throat, the royal seal worked into the fall of her sleeves. She took the throne without hurry, surveyed the hall once and let silence settle until everyone leaned into it. Tonight, she said, Delosia considers a new form of refinement. You are here because I prefer reaction in my sight rather than in my shadows. That line put half the nobles on edge immediately. The first course arrived. Small pastries, innocent almost, delicate enough that several lords looked relieved. Some were probably hoping the queen had overreacted to one fortunate banquet trick, and that they would all survive the evening by politely eating cream. Then the first bites landed. A merchant matriarch stopped mid-comment to her son and slowly turned back to her plate. A guild confectioner frowned, took another bite, and then a third, with open professional resentment. Lord Menric, seated 3 places down from a finance minister and trying very hard to wear indifference, visibly failed to keep his expression flat. The pastries were too light, too clean, too balanced. Honey had body. Fruit had acid and texture. This sweetness did not feel harvested. It felt designed. Lysandra watched all of it and said nothing. That silence made the course harsher. The second course broke the room. Spun sugar arcs rose over bright sliced fruit and whipped cream, catching light like strands of frozen amber. Not magical? Better than magical. Controlled. Crafted. Unfamiliar enough that several guests did not initially understand what they were seeing. One minister leaned toward his plate as if the garnish might vanish if viewed too directly. A noblewoman whispered, "Is it glass?" before daring to touch it. Then one snapped a strand free, tasted it, and forgot to maintain court posture for half a second. That half second traveled. Alec could feel it spreading through the room. Not everyone was shocked. Better than that. Men and women who had walked in certain of their superiority were recalculating in public. Smug mouths lost their easy set. Contempt turned into attention. Curiosity became concern. Concern became desire layered with the first sourness of realizing that desire had been created by someone they considered socially smaller than themselves. Then Lysandra made it worse for them. These dishes, she said from the throne, were developed under royal patronage from a crop common in poor northern soils. Silence. General Voren lifted his head first, not because he cared about dessert, because he cared about the phrase common in poor northern soils. Merchant families followed a second later. Menric looked as though he had just swallowed a nail. One guild elder found his voice. Your Majesty, with respect, if this is merely an improvement of humble rootstock, then surely responsible dissemination through established professional channels. No, Lysandra said. Not loudly, not angrily, just no. The man stopped. This innovation, the Queen continued, will not be dispersed through the same channels that ignored its possibility. Not yet. Delosia has wasted enough years allowing class vanity to decide what is worthy of attention. That line cut deeper than anything Alec could have said, because coming from him, it would sound like resentment. Coming from the Queen, it sounded like policy. The third course arrived. It looked plain compared to the spun sugar. Dense little ration bars cut into neat squares, wrapped partly in waxed paper for handling. Several nobles visibly thought the evening had lost momentum. Then General Voren bit into one, chewed twice, and did not bother hiding the shift in his face. "What is this?" he asked. Alec stepped forward at the Queen's slight gesture. This was his entrance. Public. Controlled. Irreversible. "A travel ration, my lord," he said. "Longer lasting than fruit paste, less messy than honey brick, more energizing than either, and made from ingredients that store well." Every eye in the hall moved to him. There is a special cruelty in being looked at by powerful people who have only just realized you matter. Alec felt it hit him and did not bend. General Voren held up the remaining half of the bar. Shelf life? With proper wrapping, weeks. Longer in cool storage. Cost? Lower if root cultivation expands. Could wagon teams carry this? Yes. Scouts? Yes. Winter patrols? Yes. The general sat back slowly and looked not at Alec, but at Lysandra. Majesty, this is not a confection matter. Correct, she said. That was the moment the room truly understood the scale of the problem. Not when the pastries tasted good. Not when the sugar gleamed. When the old quartermaster said it aloud. Luxury could be mocked. Logistics could not. From that point on, every merchant in the room knew trade was involved. Every noble knew rural land values might change. Every guild head knew the old hierarchy of prestige had been insulted by practical success. Alec had crossed the line from talented curiosity to structural threat. Then Menric made his move. He stood with all the polished confidence of a man pretending he had not been losing ground since the first course. Your Majesty, while your enthusiasm does honor to innovation, I must object to the dangerous centralization of what is plainly a culinary refinement, first nurtured in noble kitchens. The crown cannot possibly mean to overturn established custom on the testimony of one unvetted baker. Lysandra did not answer immediately. That was deliberate. She let the objection sit long enough for everyone to hear the shape of it. This is too much power for him. Return it to us.